What would you sacrifice for eternal beauty? In Victoria Gardens, they still whisper about the woman who found out the true price and the makeup empire that collapsed overnight when they discovered what was really in those beauty products. No one ever questioned Adamma's beauty until the night the screams echoed from her mansion. That night, the entire suburb of Victoria Gardens was shaken to its core. The sound that came from Adamma's grand compound was unlike anything anyone had heard before. It wasn't just a cry, it was a wail so haunting that people froze in their homes, their hearts pounding with fear. It seemed to come from deep within, as though the earth itself was groaning. The city, usually full of the noise of cars and distant chatter, fell silent. The scream echoed across the streets, bounced off the tall walls of Adamma's mansion, and rolled through the neighborhood, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Adamma was known far and wide for her beauty, her flawless skin, the way her eyes seemed to shine like stars in the night, and her smile that made heads turn wherever she went. She had built an empire in the bustling city. Her makeup line was the most sought after in the country. Women would travel miles just to sit at her feet and learn her secrets, hoping to capture even a fraction of her beauty. Her mansion stood tall in the heart of Victoria Gardens, with lush gardens, sparkling fountains, and high gates that kept the world at a respectful distance. Inside, Adamma lived in luxury. Her palace was decorated with expensive art, soft velvet couches, and marble floors that gleamed in the sunlight. She had everything she could ever want, and it all seemed perfect. But perfection, as the residents of Victoria Gardens would soon learn, often hides the darkest secrets. That night, as the scream faded into whispers, something changed in the air around Adamma's mansion. The beautiful gates that once seemed welcoming now cast menacing shadows. The perfectly manicured gardens took on a sinister quality, as if they were hiding something beneath their pristine surface. Those who lived closest to Adamma's mansion would later swear they saw strange lights dancing in her windows that night, like ancient spirits awakening from a long slumber. Others claimed they caught the scent of something burning, something that smelled nothing like ordinary fire. In the days that followed, people began to whisper. They remembered the women who had visited Adamma's beauty studio and never quite seemed the same afterward. They recalled the strange way some of her most devoted clients had simply disappeared, their absence explained away with vague stories of travels abroad or sudden moves to distant cities. But no one dared to speak these thoughts aloud. After all, this was Adamma, the queen of beauty, the woman who had transformed their quiet suburb into a destination for the wealthy and powerful. Yet, as the echo of that terrible scream lingered in their memories, the first seeds of doubt began to take root. What price had Adamma paid for her perfect beauty? And more importantly, what price had she demanded from others? Though Adamma lived in the city now, she had not always been surrounded by wealth and admiration. She had grown up in a small village called Umu, where life was simple and people knew their roots. It was there that Adamma first learned about true beauty from her grandmother, Mamaki, a healer who knew the power of the earth. Mamaki had been a figure of mystery in Umu, respected and slightly feared for her knowledge of herbs and ancient secrets. In the cool evenings, she would sit with young Adamma on their mud porch, whispering wisdom passed down through generations. Beauty is not just what you see, Mamaki would say, her weathered hands grinding herbs in a wooden mortar. It is power over others, but you must be willing to pay the price. Adamma remembered those words well. As she grew older, she became consumed with the fear of losing her beauty. She could not bear the thought of wrinkles marking her smooth skin or her hair thinning like that of the older women in the village. She watched how the other women aged, how their once vibrant laughter became tired and their proud features faded into the shadows of their past. She swore that this fate would never be hers. So while the other young women of Umu danced in the moonlight or spent time at the river, Adamma stayed inside, practicing the forbidden rituals her grandmother had once hinted at. She mixed potions and practiced incantations, pushing deeper into the darkness that lurked behind her grandmother's teachings. Mamaki had known the old ways but had used them for healing. Adamma saw a different path. When she moved to the city, Adamma quickly realized that beauty was a currency in the crowded streets and glittering halls. Beauty was power, and power could get you anything you wanted. She started her makeup line using her grandmother's secret herbs as the foundation for her products, but she added something more, something darker that Mamaki had never taught her. Word spread fast. The makeup didn't just enhance a woman's looks, it transformed them. Skin glowed, wrinkles disappeared, and eyes sparkled with an almost unnatural light. Adamma's fame grew with each passing day. Her face appeared on billboards, in magazines, and on the screens of every TV in the city. But at night, in the privacy of her mansion, Adamma would look in the mirror and see the truth. She was aging, just like everyone else. The rituals that had worked in the village weren't enough anymore. She needed something stronger, something more powerful to maintain her beauty, and in her desperation she began to explore the darkest corners of her grandmother's teachings, seeking secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. Adamma's influence grew like a shadow across the city, silent but unstoppable. Her makeup line became the most sought-after brand in the country, with women willing to spend fortunes just to own a piece of her magic. The products weren't mere cosmetics, they transformed whoever wore them, giving them a beauty that seemed almost supernatural. People adored her, especially men. They cherished her beauty, hanging on to her every word. Some would send her expensive gifts, while others would do anything just to be close to her. Her influence was unmatched. Politicians, businessmen, even religious leaders found themselves under her spell. With her beauty came great power, and Adamma knew how to use that power to her advantage. The young women of the city looked up to her as their idol. They would gather outside her makeup studio, hoping for a glimpse of her radiant face or a kind word. Many signed up for her makeup lessons, willing to pay large sums of money just to learn the secrets behind her flawless skin and the makeup that made her so alluring. Adamma's wealth grew even more, as did her reputation. Her life seemed perfect on the surface, a fairy tale of success and beauty. Every evening, Adamma would lock herself in one of her grand rooms. The walls, painted a deep red, were covered in mirrors, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and oils. It was here, under the soft glow of golden lamps, that Adamma performed her nightly rituals. Inside her private chambers, far away from the eyes of her admirers, she mixed ingredients that were never meant to be touched by human hands. One by one, women came to learn from Adamma, and beautiful ones went missing. Some disappeared without a trace, while others returned changed, their memories clouded, their spirits weakened. No one could explain why, they just knew that after visiting Adamma, they felt different, like a part of them had been taken away. The whispers began quietly at first. A model who had visited Adamma's studio vanished the next day. A beauty pageant winner cancelled all her appearances after a private session with Adamma and was never seen again. A famous actress who had sworn by Adamma's products suddenly withdrew from public life, her phone disconnected, her home empty. But Adamma's power was such that no one dared to question these disappearances openly. Her beauty empire continued to grow, built on secrets darker than anyone could imagine. The missing women became urban legends, whispered about in quiet corners but never investigated. After all, who would believe that the city's most celebrated beauty icon could be responsible for such sinister events? And so Adamma's empire flourished, fed by the darkness that lay beneath its glittering surface. There was one woman who felt something even stronger when she stepped into Adamma's studio. Her name was Yukamaka, a makeup artist who had just moved to Victoria Gardens. But Yukamaka was different from the other women. She had a strong faith in God and always prayed before making any big decisions. She believed that God would show her the way and protect her from harm. Yukamaka had heard about Adamma, like everyone else in the city. She had heard about her beauty and her success. But Yukamaka didn't just rush in. Before she did anything, she prayed. God, she said, if this is where you want me to go, lead me. And if it's not, protect me. Yukamaka trusted God completely. When she finally decided to take lessons at Adamma's studio, Yukamaka walked in with hope in her heart. But as soon as she stepped through the door, she felt uneasy. The room was beautiful, with big mirrors and shiny makeup tables, but something didn't feel right. Yukamaka couldn't explain it, but her spirit told her something was wrong. It was as if a cold wind had brushed past her, making her heart race. She felt out of place. The women waiting in the studio looked quiet and blank, as if they weren't really there. Yukamaka watched them closely, praying silently in her heart. Lord, show me what this feeling is, she whispered. Help me understand. When Adamma finally appeared, she looked just as beautiful as always. Her skin glowed, her eyes sparkled, and her smile was as sweet as honey. But Yukamaka noticed something strange in Adamma's eyes, something that made her feel cold inside. You must be Yukamaka, Adamma said with her soft, perfect voice. I've heard about you. You want to grow your makeup business? Yes, Yukamaka smiled politely, but deep inside she felt the same cold feeling in her heart. She nodded, but the words didn't come easily. Come, let me show you how it's done, Adamma said, guiding Yukamaka to a chair. As she began to talk about her makeup techniques, something inside Yukamaka was stirring. Her mind felt light, her thoughts cloudy, and she didn't like the feeling at all. She began to pray again, asking for strength. As Adamma continued to speak, Yukamaka felt something dark in the air. It was as if there was an invisible force in the room, something that wanted to pull her in. But Yukamaka's faith was strong. She could feel God's protection around her, even in that cold place. Adamma suddenly stopped speaking and looked at Yukamaka closely. Her smile faded for a moment, and her eyes seemed to search Yukamaka's soul. You are different, Adamma said softly, almost in a whisper. Yukamaka's heart skipped a beat. She knew that Adamma could sense her strength, and she knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple makeup lesson. This continued every day, Adamma standing by her side, making sure Yukamaka never touched the actual makeup, only the brushes. Every product, every item, Adamma held herself. When Yukamaka finished the makeup on her model, her heart sank. It was terrible, just as bad as the day before. The colors were wrong, the foundation was patchy, and the model's face looked like it had been painted by someone who had never held a brush before. Adamma smiled at her, that same tight smile that never reached her eyes. Don't worry, Yukamaka, she said sweetly. You'll get better. There's always room to learn. As she moved on to help other clients, Yukamaka decided to stay and watch the other students. One by one, the other students also struggled. Their models looked terrible, just like Yukamaka's. No one could get it right. This went on for days. Each time Yukamaka came in, it was the same story. She would try her best, but the makeup would always turn out wrong, no matter how carefully she followed Adamma's instructions. Adamma, on the other hand, would always create perfection. In Yukamaka's final week, something unexpected happened. As Yukamaka was practicing on a new model's face, two women burst into the studio, their faces red with anger. They stormed up to Adamma, throwing makeup products onto the table. Look at this, one of the women shouted, pointing to her client whose face looked horrible, smeared and uneven. None of this works. Look at my client, her face is ruined. Adamma quickly put down the foundation she was holding for Yukamaka and rushed over to the angry woman. Her smile never faltered as she calmly looked at the upset clients. Please don't worry, she said smoothly, taking a makeup wipe to remove the disastrous makeup from the client's face. As Adamma worked, the client's anger faded. With each stroke of Adamma's brush, the client's face began to glow, transforming from something terrible into a vision of perfection. That's when Yukamaka knew what she had to do. She walked up to Adamma, her face covered in the makeup she had just applied on herself. Adamma, Yukamaka said, her voice firm. Look at my face. Adamma turned and froze. Yukamaka's makeup was even worse than it had been on the models. Her face looked like a clown, with bright colors smeared everywhere, the foundation cracked and uneven. But Yukamaka didn't care. Take that off right now, Adamma shouted, her voice suddenly sharp and full of panic. Her usual calm and sweet tone was gone. She looked at Yukamaka with wide, angry eyes. You can't walk around like that. Take it off. No, Yukamaka said, shaking her head. She turned and ran out of the studio, her terrible makeup still on her face. Adamma chased after her, her voice rising in a scream. Come back here. Everyone in the studio was shocked. They had never seen Adamma lose control like this. She was always calm, always perfect, but now she was acting like a mad woman, all because Yukamaka had refused to remove her makeup. When Yukamaka finally reached her house, she was exhausted. She went straight to her room, still wearing the horrible makeup on her face. She didn't bother to take it off. Instead, she sat on her bed, her mind racing with questions. Suddenly, she found herself standing in the middle of a thick, dark forest. The air was cold, and the trees loomed tall and shadowy around her. The ground beneath her feet was soft, but as she looked down, her heart arrested. She was walking on skeletons. Bones crunched under her shoes with each step she took, but she couldn't stop walking. The forest path ahead seemed strangely clear, like it was used every day, but it was eerie and silent except for her own breath and the crackle of bones beneath her. She walked on, her legs feeling heavy like she was dragging her feet through thick mud. Suddenly a dark figure appeared in front of her. At first the figure stood still, smiling as though it had just found new prey. The smile was twisted, unnatural, and filled with wicked joy. But as Ukamaka continued walking, the figure's expression changed. Its smile faded into a snarl, and its eyes burned with anger. Then Ukamaka noticed the pieces of meat hanging from the branches of the trees. They were large and bloody, like they had been left there for some terrible purpose. As she prayed over each branch she passed, whispering softly in Jesus' name, something incredible began to happen. The meat started to burn, flames flickering at first small and weak, but then growing stronger, spreading across the branches. That same night, a scream pierced the quiet of Victoria Gardens. It was the kind of scream that stays with you, that crawls into your mind and refuses to leave. Everyone knew it had come from Adamma's mansion, but no one was brave enough to talk about it openly. What Ukamaka didn't know was that the scream, the one that had echoed through the neighborhood, wasn't just a sound, it was connected to her dream. The figure she had seen in the fire, that ugly, terrifying figure, was real. It was burning, screaming as it was consumed by flames. For the figure in Ukamaka's dream wasn't just a part of her nightmare, it was a spirit, a creature that Adamma had summoned through her mirror, through chants and rituals passed down by her grandmother. Through the mirror in her private room, Adamma would call upon the spirits, and they would bring her what she needed: the dried, lifeless skins of women who had fallen victim to her makeup. These women had been sacrificed, their beauty stolen, their lives used to keep Adamma's youth intact. She would take their skin, dry and shriveled, and crush it into fine powder, mixing it with her makeup. This was her secret beauty stolen from others, beauty that came with a terrible price. The weeks that followed saw Adamma's world crumble piece by piece. Her once perfect skin began to crack and peel like old paint falling off a wall. But worse than her deteriorating appearance was the smell, a horrible, rotting stench that clung to her like a curse. It was the same foul odor from the dried skins she had once crushed and used in her makeup, now returned to haunt her. Desperate to hide her transformation, Adamma covered herself with a hijab and large sunglasses. But nothing could mask the stench. Her studio, once bustling with admirers and students, emptied day by day. Women who had once paid fortunes to learn from her now crossed the street to avoid her path. The powerful men who had once showered her with gifts and attention now wouldn't even take her calls. Adamma tried to maintain her influence, arranging meetings in fancy restaurants and hotels. She bathed herself in expensive perfumes, hoping to cover the smell, but it was useless. The stench followed her everywhere, growing stronger with each passing day. Even in the middle of a crowded restaurant, people would whisper and move away, their faces twisted in disgust. It was during this time that Ukamaka felt called to visit Adamma's mansion. Following the smell that now permeated the entire street, she pushed open the grand gates and walked up the long driveway. The house loomed ahead, its windows dark like eyes watching her approach. Inside, Ukamaka found Adamma in a dimly lit room, crushing something in a small black mortar and pestle. She looked nothing like the woman Ukamaka had once known. Her face was pale and ancient, her eyes sunken, her hands trembling as she worked. "You," Adamma hissed, her voice hoarse. "You've been trying to ruin me, haven't you?" Ukamaka shook her head. "No, Adamma. I've been trying to understand. What is this? What have you done?" Adamma let out a bitter laugh. "You wouldn't understand. My beauty, my power, it was never mine. I had to take it. I had to steal it from others." She looked down at the black mortar in her hands, her grip tightening. "I took it from the women, the ones who disappeared. The spirits helped me. But now," her voice broke, "now they've come for me. The spirits want back what I took, and I can't stop them." Adamma, Ukamaka's voice was calm but firm. "I'm not here to judge you, but you have to confess. You have to let go of this darkness. If you confess and ask for forgiveness, you can be saved. It's not too late." But Adamma clutched the mortar containing the crushed skin powder as if it were her last lifeline. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, her eyes wide with desperation. "Don't you see? My name, my business, the men who love me, the cars, the money, it's all I have left. If I confess, I would lose everything. No one will want me. No one will love me if they know what I've done. The famous beauty empire crumbled overnight. News reporters, bloggers, and social media exploded with gossip about Adamma's strange behavior and the terrible smell that followed her everywhere. Everyone who owned her products quickly threw them away, afraid they might be cursed. The grand mansion that had once symbolized her power now stood empty, its windows dark and uninviting. Weeks turned into months, and the longer Adamma stayed in the mansion, the more her mind slipped away. She was losing herself to the very darkness she had created. Finally, she could no longer take it. She left the mansion, roaming the streets with no destination in mind. She no longer hid behind her hijab or sunglasses. She wandered through the city with her face bare, her once beautiful skin now wrinkled and ruined, her hair wild, and the smell still following her. No one recognized her anymore. The once glamorous, powerful woman was now just a mad old woman wandering the streets. People passed her by, holding their noses and shaking their heads. Some whispered, "What happened to her? Where is her family?" But no one knew the truth. The downfall of Adamma, the famous beauty mogul, became a short-lived sensation. It was a paper-fire topic. Everyone talked about it for a while, and then, just as quickly, they moved on with their lives. Victoria Gardens went back to normal, but something had changed. The women who had once adored makeup now avoided it, afraid of what it could do. They whispered about the curse of Adamma, afraid that if they wore any makeup, they too might end up smelling bad or grow old quickly like her. What they didn't know was that Adamma hadn't aged quickly overnight. Instead, she had used the beauty and life of other women to stay young and flawless. Every wrinkle, every bit of youth she had kept for herself had been stolen. Ukamaka couldn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe her if she told them the truth about Adamma? The dark secrets she had uncovered, the haunting screams, the strange, cursed beauty, none of it seemed real. If she told anyone what she had seen, they would think she was mad. How could she explain that Adamma's beauty had come from something so evil, so twisted? No, Ukamaka had to keep the story to herself. She carried the weight of it in her heart, knowing that even if she spoke, no one would understand. The world would never believe that the glamorous Adamma had fallen because of dark rituals, stolen beauty, and spirits seeking revenge. Ukamaka could only pray that the truth would never be needed again, and that the people of Victoria Gardens would remain safe from the darkness that had once hidden behind Adamma's perfect face.